Edward McCabe was many things: a lawyer, land agent, newspaper publisher, and in 1882, the first Black state auditor in Kansas, and the highest elected Black official outside of the American South. Above all, McCabe had a grand vision. He believed deeply in the promise of Black self determination, not as abstraction, but as geography. And he spent years promoting all Black towns in Oklahoma Territory as a refuge from racial terror and political exclusion. At his height, McCabe imagined Oklahoma becoming a Black governed state, a place where Black political power could finally be exercised without white control. That vision and its violent suppression sits at the heart of Black Moses, a new book by the historian and journalist and Northeastern professor Gayle. It's a story of tragedy, shattered dreams, but also of justice in all its forms. It's a moving, beautiful piece of nonfiction. As one reviewer later noted, quote, Gayle writes with great empathy, and though Black Moses contains many tangents, he keeps bringing readers back to a main point: that formal emancipation was meaningless without substantive political power. Gayle isn't the first to note that truth, but his compelling study of McCabe's crusade for Black self-determination richly illustrates just how tenuous the promise of freedom remained. Black Moses went on to be longlisted for a National Book Award and recognized by a range of publications, including the New York Times, the Boston Globe, and the Washington Post, as one of the best books of 2025. Gayle, welcome to Origin Stories.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure being here.
I had read a bunch of Black Moses before, and I went back and reread it and was struck by what an amazing story it is. And you don't address this in the introduction, but I'm really curious. When did you first, or maybe you don't remember, do you remember when you first heard the name Edward McCabe?
Yeah. It was years ago, and I just kind of assumed he was an Irishman. Because not just because of his last name, but because it was in a part of Oklahoma that I really didn't know much about. I was pledging a Black fraternity. We had to go to Langston, Oklahoma for our kind of formal intake process. And I was in Guthrie, Oklahoma, and there was a plaque there that said Edward P. McCabe. And I didn't understand who he was, what he was, but I assumed that he must have been a white guy, in part because his dreams were a bit ostentatious. I thought for a Black person to pursue and execute, let alone get a plaque in your honor in the middle of this pretty white part of the state. So that was the first time I had ever encountered him. But then it became clear as to who he was when I was writing my first book, and I would see these correspondences between like Black people who were citizens and formerly enslaved by like these indigenous nations who were writing letters about how dope Oklahoma was for Black people. And McCabe being on some of the receiving ends of those correspondences, and it just cracked open this world that I otherwise would have never known.
Did you ever at any point, or at what point do you say, or what's been written about this guy so far? Like what books exist? Where is he mentioned? Does that come pretty early on?
Yeah, I mean, you would hope so. I mean, I did the foolhardy thing, which was like fly to Kansas and fly to Oklahoma during like the heat of the pandemic because I was so inspired by this guy's story, so interested. And I went to the historical societies and like large archives and I was like, could you put me in the direction of the Edward McCabe room? Because I just assumed someone like this must have had all of that. And the archivists and librarians would laugh in my face, deservedly so. But quite frankly, I got lucky because the person that I chose to be the Virgil of this story was someone who was a bit of a narcissist, an extreme narcissist, to be honest, and published his own newspapers, founded his own towns, picked fights with whomever he would pick fights with. And so, like any other kind of investigative magazine piece that you or I have spent far too much time doing, where the subject doesn't want to talk to us, it became almost this chase to put together a narrative where, you know, the main person that we're writing about or really telling the story through doesn't really want to talk to us. So it felt very familiar to me in some weird ways, even though he's been dead for over 100 years.
That's a super interesting perspective. Let's talk about research. You have a person who left a certain paper trail, but there hasn't been a tremendous amount written about him. What's the first? Well, let me tell you what my first step would be, and then you tell me if I'm way, way off. I always
Please.
think about this with like any sort of stuff that like sort of touches on biography. I guess what I would do is try to find anything that I could that had been written, make like a little bit of a timeline, and then start to plug in sources that I dug up. Am I close?
Hmm. You're very organized, and I love that for you. I think when I become interested in a subject, I just get obsessive and I try and get lost purposefully. Like I don't try and create a timeline. I don't try and organize anything. I get really lost and try to see if a through line kind of comes to me. And then I return to the page to then try and what is this person? Like what do they ask? And then what I also start to do, especially if I can, even especially for not just this book, but also for other projects, is I start to eventually just develop a list of questions that I would ask any person about their life or about certain experiences and see what the archival material, oral histories, etc. Like, can any of them answer all of these questions? So it's much more like, can I almost seem to have a conversation with someone I've never met before with all of the material that I've gathered? And then I go back to trying to make it legible to a reader, right? Like then I think you're doing the right thing, the thing that any good magazine journalist would do, any good storyteller would do, which is like, well, what's the beginning, what's the middle, and what's the end of
Yeah.
this person's life. And for me, I just have to get super lost, like incredibly lost, frustratingly lost, frustrating to myself, to my editor, to my wife, to my friends. And then I also ask them to ask me questions about this person, right? Try and stump me when I get more confident. So I think that's kind of how I approach it. And that's why the book was initially going to be kind of this tale of three friends and became a tale of one person's journey through it, in part because he was the only one who could answer all the questions that I had.
That's so fascinating. When did you pare it down to just McCabe? When was it? By what point was it just him?
Yeah, pretty early in the process, right? So I get pretty obsessive with my reporting and research before I even open my mouth to say that this is a book that I might want to do to anyone, agent, editor, whatever. And so I had initially told my agent, like, look, okay, here are these. Like when I felt like I had enough, I knew that I didn't have enough to make it equal between these three guys. One was, a crook. One was kind of the spitting image of a racial reconciler, and one was McCabe. And the reality was is that like the one who was a racial reconciler's life just got super boring, even though he lived to over 100. And then this guy who was a crook, who was accused of murder and philandering and adultery, just like didn't do much thereafter. And so my agent was just like, the answer. Like, that's not,
Mm.
this isn't you, it's going to be this one guy who we're driving through and towards. So I think to some extent it became that became the case before I even sent it to my editor. So luckily I abandoned the three-part story or the three-person story ages and ages and ages before we got to the point of actually working earnestly on the book post contract.
What I was struck with reading the book is that it's kind of two things at once. It's McCabe on the one hand, and then it's this theme of Black people in the US in this time period, or in the time period before, looking for a homeland or a state of their own, or self-governance in some way. And in fact, the book is really interestingly structured. I want to talk to you about this. Like there's an exciting anecdote at the front, like we get the guns drawn and we get all the stuff, and then you take us back to the various ways people have thought in the United States about where Black people should have their own space,
Mhm.
Liberia, Haiti, whatever. Get those horrific quotes from Abraham Lincoln, which I guess I'd read before, but like, anyway. So, at what point did you know that that was going to be, or did you know from the beginning that it's like you've got a person or people who are going to drive the narrative, be the Virgil, as you say, and then you've got this tremendous big theme that undergirds it. Did you know that from the beginning?
I think that because I do spend a lot of my time in academia, I have a tendency to veer almost exclusively to the broad theme and its
Mm,
interaction and how those themes are in conversation with what other people like me have been
mm,
thinking and writing about. Um, Thing is, no one cares about that, or very few people, few book buyers, few adapters of this sort of work into things for the screen or whatever. Very few people care. Editors don't care too much about that. But I was pretty earnest in trying to do so, right? So I like came up with this. I remember coming to my editor. I said, "Look, man, I don't want to." It's early on in the book writing process. I'm like, I don't want to like put too much on it, but
yeah.
um, I think I might have just cracked the code of like nonfiction writing. Like I just, so I like fur away, head into this like fugue state, which I usually do, right? When I'm like deep into the writing, like I kind of almost disassociate and I'm just in a flop sweat mode. And I like punch out like 30,000 words over the course of a few weeks. And it was all this kind of, you know, it was emerging as this tome that was all about how if Black people want to begin in America, they first have to go through their exodus. So we're going to structure the book,
Mm.
ironically, with Exodus first and then Genesis. And I remember I sent it to my editor. He like hits me up and he's like, "Hey man, I need you to come to New York whenever you get the chance." I was like, "It's my time. I've ascended." Only for him to be like, "That's great for you and I'm so proud of you, but this sucks," right? It's so not clear, right? It's so not clear. And he was looking at in there were all of these just like bits that were so scenic, right? Like you talked about
Mhm.
Haiti, like there are scenes of Black people who had recently escaped from slavery in the middle of civil war and were being taken to Haiti because some random kind of ne'er-do-well tobacco salesman from New Orleans had convinced the president and a bunch of rich guys, "Hey, you want to do away with your Negro problem? I got an idea for you. Ship off
Yeah.
the free ones to Haiti," right? I mean,
Mm.
like he's like, that's seen. You don't need to worry as much about the deep meaning because the meaning's going to slap people across the face if we write it with clarity. So to me, I think to answer your question, I'm so obsessed. My brain just goes to theme. I'm also like the son and grandson of pastors, right? Like Black pastors, and all we really care about is is like theme, right? We're aiming towards the salvific crescendo. And so to some extent, I have to work with myself to get back to just telling the story as it happened, or as I saw it happening. And that's always where I struggle the most.
Yes, but the counterpoint to that is if it's just narrative, like I know those books sell. I understand what you're saying. It's like people want a ringing yarn. However, here's what I would say: the books that are really truly critically successful
Mhm.
and popularly successful have to do both at once. Like
Sure.
they can't just do one.
I agree. I agree. And like some of the people who were in mind as I was writing it, right, were like both, I mean, it sounds odd, but both Cormac McCarthy, but then also Isabel Wilkerson, right? Like
Mm,
Isabel is telling you this story over way more pages than my book of
mhm.
the Great Migration. And she's just is devoted to these three people. Now, in that, she's like doing a lot of what academics might call the work, but at the same time she is relentlessly following three people after having interviewed like 600. And then likewise when you read Blood Meridian, like Cormac is literally telling you the scene's moves so that he can then reveal to you some of these deeper meanings, right? So like I had both of those authors in mind as I was resting myself from really just writing an agonizingly long academic article.
I mean, here's the question for you because you deal with you come from also the world of academia as well as journalism, and it's such an interesting trap that academics can find themselves in where they have to publish just for other academics. Like you have to
Mhm.
you're in that world. Like you have to prove yourself to a certain point, but at the same time you want people to read your book. Like you don't want your book to be read by 3 other peers that you're gonna see every 6 years at a conference. So, like, it's a tough road. It's a tough road.
Tough road, but thankfully there are people who like have gone down that road successfully, right? So I was thinking about people like Taya Miles who can
Mm.
use all of the tools of historiography to like render the beauty of this sack in all that she carried, right? Which
Yeah.
sold a ton of books, sure, and also like changed the game for us nerds.
Yeah.
But at the same time, didn't shy away from showing you her work. Like part of showing us her work became part of the narrative in and of itself. And so to some extent, that's part of what I was doing, right? Like the navigating to other attempts at Black liberation, whether it was on behalf of Black people or brought to us by Black people, was a part of me kind of showing that work that then became actually the narrative in and of itself. It built up to McCabe's decision to strike out on his own.
Do you think of yourself when you're writing these books? You've got two and you've got a third on the way. Do you think of them as academic books? Like, do you think of these as academic projects, or does this live in a different, this is like a different part of your personality career?
Yeah, no, it definitely lives in a different part. I think it 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 is engaging with a lot of academic texts and academic
Mm.
work. It's doing a lot of like I'm not stating, this argument is the argument that I'm engaging with and I'm presenting a different perspective on. I don't do that work, and I don't do that work with books. I won't. I refuse to. So to some extent, I feel as if hopefully my work makes people that much more interested in the work of my colleagues, not just here at Northeastern, but across the academy, right? It provides a way in because I still find a lot of those academic texts incredibly interesting, but I'm also part of the system. So it's important for me to help provide a bridge for people because there are so many others who are dedicated in their souls to doing this appropriate work of yes talking to other academics. I don't have a problem with that. I just have a desire. Maybe I'm more of a narcissist like McCabe and want people to know what it is that I write about. And so that to me is the goal, is to create a bridge, and in many cases, that means unearthing these stories that would otherwise not be told.
I'm running buddies with a professor of history at
Mm,
University of Florida, and he talks about this all the time, like this sort of like you're serving two overlords
yes.
for lack of a better term. However, there are people who, like you, do it really well. I think the trick is being able to do it. It's like not everyone can do it. Maybe they want to reach popular audiences, but they don't have the toolkit.
I would hope that more people than we assume can do it, but I think that also I wish that the academy incentivized people to do it more.
Yeah.
And I think that's like that's what your running buddy from the University of Florida is talking about
Yeah.
is that the incentive structure, like what you have to be able, the way the landing strip for the plane that you're flying is so tiny and you have to land it so perfectly that if you don't, you'll be penalized uh, incessantly for it. So thankfully, I've been able to kind of land that plane, and others. And I do look to people like Jill and a host of others, Claudio Sounds, Philip Deloria, a bunch of people who have been able to do that successfully.
We should have discussed this at first, like why it's so important for people to do that. Well, it's partially because of these unnamed books that we're talking about, which are just pop history that people
Hmm.
consume that could be full of errors. But on a wider level, it's like you want people to care about what you're researching and what is being discovered inside the academy. And the easiest way to do that is to be a really good storyteller and to be able
Without
to tell a
question.
story.
Completely
Um,
agree.
I have a question for you. I want you to think about it before you answer. How important is beautiful writing? How important is the quality of prose for you?
It's the ball game. For me, look, I just don't take for granted that people want to spend, I don't know, 28, 33, $39 to open a book and make it through. Like I just don't assume that at baseline people want to do that. And I'm not even talking about in our modern era where you can, get your dopamine hit from, opening your phone or watching a movie or any of these different things. Like I just don't take for granted that people want to do that, right? Then on top of that, I know for sure that like writing about a person who people do not know, or landing on themes that are not, suffused with romantasy or things that move copies easily without trying. So then the only thing that I have in my arsenal, like literally the only thing, are beautiful sentences. And even more than that, I think about my subjects. There's so much ugliness that has been used to paint and describe the lives of these
Mm.
people
Mhm.
that, like, the only thing that I can offer them, whether they're here with us or not, is some relative beauty in the way that I render their stories. Like, that's the only thing that I have in my arsenal that might help their memory to some extent. So that, for me, beautiful prose is the ball game. That's all that I have in my arsenal.
I think it's true. I mean, I think it's like there's still room for appreciation of good writing. I mean, no matter how much AI slop gets put out there,
Sure.
I get it's like maybe not for everybody, but I think for a lot of readers, there is maybe even more than ever. There's a sense that like they want real beauty or a real artistic connection in some way. I certainly find that myself, like just clicking through TV, even. I'm
Hmm.
like, I need something original and
Definitely.
that actually reaches me. But I want to return for a second to something that you said your editor said, which is like, it's a great way of putting it, thinking about, you know, dwelling too much on theme, that readers will get it. They'll get it like atmospherically if you tell the story in the right way, which
Uh-huh.
is really, really good advice. Had you heard that advice before?
No. No, I hadn't. And I mean, again, this is why I appreciate him so much, is that he didn't deliver it either in like the a way that would, feel like a parent, comforting a hurt child. He delivered it with sharp barbs, which is perhaps the way that it caught my attention and is still with me. So no, it was the first time I ever heard that advice, especially articulated in that way.
It's really smart. I mean, and it's a good way of thinking about it. I mean, there's the caveat that the writing better be good if you want people to get the theme. If you want them to get it, they're not going to get it if the writing's bad. But it's good advice.
I would say so.
All right, so tell me about the split career you have. When do you do your writing? So when you're working on this book, you have to teach. You have a course. What do you have? Two courses a semester? One course?
Yeah, it depends on the semester, but usually two courses. I've tried to be more disciplined about guarding my time. Theoretically, like I teach on Tuesdays and Thursdays. In an ideal world, Mondays and Wednesdays are really just for me to write. And sadly, because I'm not a fiction writer, I can't just like sit on a blank screen and just begin to spew things.
Mhm.
Sometimes the writing is, in many cases, noting in the margins what I'm reading, right? Such that I'm oftentimes, when I'm reading stuff, whether it's archives or court transcripts for a magazine story or whatever, I'm having a conversation with the page and noting that down. And I'm usually doing it by hand. I kind of have to print things out and write by hand. And usually a lot of my kind of aha moments come while I'm writing longhand. Now, I don't write the entire thing longhand, but I do write significant chunks of it that way. And usually I have to kind of block off my Mondays and Wednesdays. It's easier to do now, like that I have tenure. I can kind of tell my students, no, screw off. I don't want to talk to you right now. But it's difficult managing that and managing, research projects and running a center here and all of those other things. But I never envisioned in my mind that I would be a freelancer full on, right? Like I need an income, I need healthcare. There's just things that I've become accustomed to needing and wanting. And so as such, I just have to almost segment my writing to Mondays and Wednesdays. And then Fridays and the weekends become revision, where
Interesting.
I don't I don't allow myself to spend time revising whatsoever on Mondays and Wednesdays. I don't believe in it. Revision is a it's a sacrosanct uh, exercise, and it allows me to return to my work with almost reckless abandon and complete disregard for my feelings.
What a great idea. Did you come up with that yourself? Did someone once tell you, like, to do it that to split it that way?
My wife, who is not at all in this world, I mean, she's a surgeon and a scientist and a researcher, and she though kind of has to somewhat segment her life in similar ways where there are days where she's operating and she cannot spend any time thinking about anything else. And on those other days is when she's, doing her research and thinking clearly about what it is that she wants to do going forward. But she was also the person who told me while she was in residency to quit my job, and write. And then she then said, I think something, she was like, look, I just need you to be good at it. So like, you need
No
to,
pressure.
yeah, no pressure, right? Like we're both in New York and she's asking me to quit my job while she's in residency. And she's like, I need you to make money at this somehow. So like you need to be way more structured and organized in your approach. So I don't want to hear any of this, I need to be in the mood to write. She was like that. We're deading that immediately. And I think that sort of both pressure to be productive and successful, at least somewhat, really kind of helped to create that structure. And it's the structure that I've been working with now for quite some time.
I'm genuinely want your advice about this because it's something I think about a lot, which is this switching between modes, creative modes, which I bet a lot of people will find this applicable. It used to be 30 years ago, you could just be a magazine writer
Mm-hmm.
and you just get to write a magazine article every 2 months. Nowadays, people have to do a gazillion different things at once. Do you find, because, there's the old school advice from Hemingway or whoever that like, you got to look at it every day. Like you got to look at the thing you're doing every day because you're even if you just touch it once, like you got to keep it live in your brain. That's harder and harder to do. So when you come back to your book project, let's say after a day of teaching, how do you get yourself? Do you jump right back in? Do you need to get your toes wet first? How do you manage it?
Yeah, so I think like I'm lucky in that like I have what some might perceive to be somewhat of a sinecure. I mean, it's not because I'm quite the aggressive teacher and researcher and like participant in this academic experience. And so as such, I'm pretty like fired up post class, right? My students are like, it's all a performance. My students are performing, I'm performing, but I'm pretty worked up. And so as such, like to some extent, I kind of got to settle down, right? I can't like touch coffee. I can't do any of that before I come to the page because I'm usually just revved up. And when I noticed very differently, like when I was working in management consulting and like flying to some place I hated to do some stuff like lay off people or like something just absolutely soul sucking. Like I needed to have like some significant I was drained. I was done and could not write very well. And the only thing that would motivate me was a deadline. Whereas now I'm pretty energized. The thing that sucks your soul in academia is like the administrating component of it, right? Like the faculty meetings and committee this and
Mhm.
committee that, and that just makes you want to quit everything in life. But engaging with students actually fires me up and gets my brain thinking in different ways, such that I come to the page and I actually have to kind of like I need to listen to some Enya or something, like calm my soul down or something. I just need like something so chill to get me to like focus and sit because I'm like rattled and ready to go. So that hopefully that answers the question. I get I'm in an enviable place where I enjoy the thing that brings my W-2 income in, right? And as such, it vivifies what's going on in my brain such that I want to return to the page and I'm a little too worked up when I return to the page.
Caleb, what's the most that you could thinking about Black Moses specifically? What's the most you think you wrote in a day, like in a single sitting? How many words do you think you were able to really bang out when you sat down?
If I'm gonna if I'm going to be honest, I was on a Radcliffe fellowship, so like
Hmm.
ostensibly we were supposed to be doing that all day anyway. So I just actually like I remember one day in particular, I sat for about excluding bio breaks, I sat for like 8 hours straight and just like cranked. And I think at the end of it, again, because you're like going back in between, this document. I'm not resorting to my imagination. I'm like going back and forth to documents. And so I have this massive screen with like tons of things in cursive and whatnot. But I think ultimately I got to like 3,500 words. Um, and I
That's a
just remember
lot.
that it was a ton. And how much of it stayed, I don't know. But it was a dream day. I don't think I've ever gotten there again.
Did you write your way through? Well, you mentioned that you kind of split your time between revisions and writing. Was that the case with this book too? Did you revise as you were going every week?
No, so I have a wonderful relationship with my editor such that I would send him chapters as I went to get his directional feedback so as to ensure that when it came time to deliver the full manuscript, he wasn't surprised with what he got. And I think that was a lifesaver.
Yeah, say a little bit more about this because I do think that what you're describing, I've heard this from different guests, including someone from TV. He was talking about a series, a popular series, Only Murders in the Building, and he was like, here's the two things that could happen. You could wait to the very end to show the executives what you've created and pray that you got it right. Or you can show them pieces and have them tell you that you're on the right track or not, right?
Yep.
More or less what you're saying.
Yes, the latter is what I prefer. And I think again, like I'm a creature of, Harvard Business School and management consulting and finance where like there is no universe in which you just like abandon your client and say, I'll get back to you in
Yeah.
3 weeks with the financial model that you're looking for and acquisition targets. Like you are checking in every I mean, in some awful environments, every few minutes, quite literally, you're having a check-in call and a team meeting and a brainstorming session. So to me, that's what I'm used to. And so my editor was really alarmed when I sent him a Gantt chart, which for those of you who don't know is a process chart. When we first signed the deal, I'm like, I'm going to have this at this date, this at this date. This is your time to like give me feedback. And that's just how I work. That allows me to kind of create the boundaries of me getting lost in the materials. And then eventually finding my way back is creating almost a superstructure within which I can be creative.
And it also probably incentivizes you if the feedback is good, right? If he's like, yeah, great job, Caleb, be like, yeah, man, time to get back into it.
True,
Uh,
true. Less so when the
it's
advice is bad, but yes, go for it. Yeah.
Well, can you remember? Do you remember a time during the book writing process where you got feedback from your editor that was like, well, you mentioned something earlier when you were thinking about a different form for the book, but like once you're into it, you know it's McCabe and you've got the basic structure. Was there a time when your editor was like, sorry, dude, this doesn't work?
Yes. I am like I go down rabbit holes. I mean, you're left to your own devices with people that you can't speak to because they've been dead for 100 years. You can go to some really interesting places. And as such, yeah, I mean, I remember I gave him like 10,000 words on Quakers. He was like, this shit is both not well written and the content sucks, right? Like you've somehow hit 1,000, right? Like you literally, like, and so to some extent, like I think one, like I'm very jealous of people who like write brilliant first drafts. I will never be one of them, right? I mean, my first drafts are terrible. They're worrisome. They're concerning, and so to some extent, like again, that's part of the intentionally getting lost to eventually become found. And yeah, I mean, there are plenty of examples, the Quaker example being just one, in which my editor was like, this sucks and I don't care, was kind of the meat on that feedback.
Every book, every magazine article teaches you something, teaches me something anyway when I write them. What did Black Moses teach you?
I think it taught me that I like writing books more than magazines,
Mm,
selfishly. I
mm.
find um, the opportunity to both let it rip a little more, to be really enjoyable. I like the fact that it feels like a bigger risk, right? I like the fact that it's not nearly as ephemeral. And I think even where we do a lot of our work in New York Times Magazine, it's oftentimes almost indistinguishable when you're looking online where most people read things, whether this is like a magazine story, a long
Mhm.
feature in the newspaper, is it both? What is it? And for me, there's something really enjoyable about like being lost. You can be but so lost on a magazine story. And you need to get found pretty darn soon. And so for me, I learned that that's just how my brain works. That's where I found greater levels of joy. And it's where I want to spend more of my time as opposed to, trying and in many cases failing on the magazine front. I want to try and take bigger and bigger swings in rendering these really tough tales. I think the last thing though is that um I'm getting to write about really obscure people and
Mhm.
directly seeing the feedback, right? Being in the driver's seat as to how this story gets told and distributed, and being able to interact with people who are actively seeing it and then seeking it out thereafter. And that's something that I just don't get. And I love that. Like it's a beautiful thing to do and to engage in. So I find myself at a greater level of happiness here in this book world as opposed to this magazine world.
Well put. Caleb, thanks so much for doing this.
Matt, it means a lot to me that you make the time. I really loved it.